Welcome, everybody, to the second of a recurring chip race strategy segment in which we put a PKO hand history under the microscope. I'm David Lappin, and I am joined by PKO poker strategy authors Dara and Barry Carter. Welcome to you both.
Hello, David.
Hi, David.
I see you both on screen right now. We're going to get to this one shortly. But before we start, a big thank you to Unibet Poker, who not only sponsor these videos, but they also put on this very special tournament series, the recently concluded PKO Winter Series, a 32 tournament festival played between January 24th and 31st, 2021, from which we have effectively reaped Barry Carter's hand histories, or at least a combination of the most interesting hands. Unibet had guaranteed 225k, but smashed that, getting over 291k in the total prize pool for this festival, giving away 8k via a leaderboard and an additional 3k via a free roll for everyone who picked up 30 bounties or more. They also gave everyone who qualified for that free roll a copy of PKO Poker Strategy. Very generous of them indeed. Barry's recording here will be our blackboard of sorts, and we will be going through all the interesting hands he encountered. Well, first up here, a familiar face on screen. Dara, your Unibet avatar, I see there. It looks like it might be close to the very first hand. This is an anomaly that occurs sometimes on Unibet, where if you late reg, you sometimes get seated heads up for one singular hand. Obviously, up against...
Hang on now, David. Don't accuse us of late regging. You should never late reg a PKO. I'm pretty sure we didn't late reg this one.
We did late reg this one, but it was about 90 seconds into the tournament.
Okay. Yeah, I've no memory of how I missed this.
In fairness, Dara could have, because you do have a slightly bigger stack, Dara, you could have been there on time, and it's Barry who arrived in for the second hand of the day.
This is true. Actually, yeah. I do have I have half an extra big blind, so yeah. I presume I reg normally, and Barry late regged and messed everything up.
So you do actually cover Barry, but he doesn't cover you right now.
Oh, see that completely changed. I actually thought we had this is an interesting spot because
beady-eyed laughing here. Got you, Barry.
already Barry's outed as a donkey. This is
because I play on Unibet a lot. I am aware of this little sort of quirk with Unibet where if two people late register at the same time, I was used to us both having the same stacks in a spot like this because it happens so often. So I didn't realize that we didn't have the same stacks. So that completely changes what I thought was going to be an incredibly clever metagame argument I was going to make for this hand.
Okay, well, let's hear it anyway, Barry.
Okay. Well,
based on the fact that you thought we had the same stack, because you can't actually...
Based on the fact that we thought we had the same stack. So there's a spot in the PKO Poker Strategy book where we mention something that I felt that if Dara and I were ever at the same table, how would we play because of this? Which is, it is the first hand of a PKO, it's such an advantage to get the chip lead for the second hand that it's, technically speaking, two players would be right to get all the money in almost blind against each other because they need less than 50% equity to do so. That's what I was going with. So I kind of thought to myself, well, Dara knows that, and I know that because we were the two people that put it on paper. So if we have the exact same stack and I open shove a better than average hand, he might call me with like King 8 or something.
Well, in fairness to you, at least half of your argument still applies, because if you do win this hand and get him to fold, you do have the chip lead over him for the next hand. But of course, 4 or 5 more people are going to arrive any second.
Yeah, and the other thing, I actually remember that calculation because it's one of the first calculations I ever did when I started looking at PKOs. Basically, 46.7% is the break-even equity. So if I shove blind and you shove and you call blind, we're both actually making a profitable play, providing we know for a fact that the other player is blind. I mean, obviously, I don't know that you're blind here, and you're probably not even blind. But well, you are blind because you can't read how many big blinds each of us has, but not in the sense that we need you to be blind. Yeah, I mean, there's some argument for that. Even even if we did have the same stack, though, I'm not sure this is the best way to play the hand. Because I mean, I'm only going to call with better hands than ace-6 suited. So you're going to be in pretty bad shape. In fact, you're going to be dominated by a lot of my calling range.
Even if you think I'm specifically shoving blind and you only need 45 point whatever it is.
Yeah, first of all, I wouldn't have made that assumption in game. I mean, before I knock your argument down further, I would say one other thing in favor of your argument is if we look at the top of the screen, we can see this is a re-entry. Now, normally I don't advocate re-entering PKOs, but if you bust first hand, obviously it's not a big deal to re-enter. It's fine. So I would have called a bit wider because of that. But the other thing is you are kind of just destroying a pretty nice hand. Like there's lots of ways you can win a pot here, or you can cooler me. You know, some of the time I'll have 2 spades and we'll get it in on a flop because we both flop a flush or a flush draw. And obviously you have the nut one. I'm going to fold pretty much all those hands to this shove. I don't think I'm even going to call king, queen of spades. So you're kind of destroying the value of your hand a little bit. Now, there is some benefit to the fact that you will be chip leader afterwards. But, you know, as David said, there are other people who come to the table. Also, like we're so deep that the chip lead at this stage, it's not quite the same as if everybody had 20 big blinds, roughly, because there's going to be less all-in pre-flops anyway. People can just call normal raises and stuff, so there's going to be more play. But I mean, I like I do like the innovation. It's just the execution leaves a little bit to be desired.
There was another factor involved as well, which it was funny. And I don't know if you've noticed in the few times that I've played against both of you, but I do have a tendency to kind of show off because I want to tweet about it afterwards.
Yeah.
So the brag equity, the future brag
equity, yeah.
Donk off, I think is the relevant phrase. Yeah, I mean, I would have factored that in. Like, I would have called wider than against some players, but you know that doesn't necessarily suit you either. Like, if I call off at a hand that dominates you, it's a terrible spot for you. Even with the future equity of bounties and winning my immediate bounty immediately if you dog me, and the fact that you can re-enter quickly is also a mitigating factor. But yeah, it's just this is a very clunky way to play this hand, I think.
Okay, so, on to the next one.
Yeah, keeping in mind it's funny, I want to tweet about equity for the, for the next hand and most of the video. So
wow, this is a really interesting spot. So we're looking at 4 people all in. It looks like you've probably maybe, I'm going to guess it's gone raised to 4x under the gun, call by you, shove. Is that
5-way all in, is it? 5-way Barry calls.
It was a limp under the gun.
It was a limp, okay.
I raised to 4. Again, this is if not the first hand, it's the second hand of the tournament. Then it was one of the faster PKOs, which is why everybody's just got like 80 bigs or something. Yeah, it was the second hand of the tournament actually. And then it goes shove. Back around to me with pocket 9s.
And you cover 3 of the 4 people.
That's correct, yes. And the thing that's going to colour my soon-to-be destroyed argument throughout the entirety of it is this is about 5 days into the series, and I'm doing quite well in the leaderboard for bounties. So in all honesty, I knew this was a fold in normal circumstances, but I was wondering if the fact that I've got, I'm in a money position in the leaderboard at the moment plays any sort of role into it. And then I've done some maths which almost vindicates me.
That seems like a pretty reasonable argument. I remember playing all of these tournaments, and I remember this one specifically was a small buy-in. It was I think it was a $10 game.
It's €10 because
it's €10.
Everybody's bounty's $4.70. So
yeah, and this is second hand, obviously, and you can immediately basically buy back the same stack again in a re-entry format. Second hand, again, not much different to first hand. That's not so bad to hop back in, particularly when there is this additional equity in getting on the leaderboard, and it's cheap to get bounties in this one. If it's a $10 buy-in compared to a £100 buy-in and a £50 buy-in, that is maybe what most of the games were. This is actually a very cheap way to add up some bounties to your tally.
Yeah, I think what you'd have to do is you'd have to say, okay, well, what are our chances of actually winning this and getting those 3 bounties? And then what would 3 bounties typically be worth at the end of the leaderboard? So it's a calculation based on that.
So plus a little bit of extra there is that, like, obviously with 370 bigs, you're covering everybody for the foreseeable future, and you can start taking kind of spots to get more bounties that way too.
Yeah, so it's rough sort of guerrilla maths, as we call it. It's like it's cost me 70 to win a potential pot if it actually became 355, which means I need just under 20% equity in a normal chip EV situation. But we have a bounty factor of slightly less than 1. This is a term from the book PKO Poker Strategy, which, Dara, roughly means we can knock 5% off that equity to bring it to.
Well, actually, to be honest, this is a really complicated spot because we can't win all the bounties.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, we don't have a bounty factor of 1. Multiway is really difficult, and to be honest, the applying bounty factor is really, really guerrilla maths. But yeah, if you covered everybody in this hand, and you could win all the bounties, and they all have starting bounty and roughly starting stack, that would mean the bounty factor for the main pot was 1, and therefore you could knock roughly 5.5% off the equity that you need. This is complicated though because you can't win one of the bounties, so you're in a 5-way pot, but you can only win 4 bounties. So it's actually more like bounty factor is 0.8, which let me just look that up quickly. What that changes it to?
Got a feeling it's 3.5%.
3.5%. That sounds about right. Yeah. So now we're down to like, but it's complicated because that's the main pot. We can win bounties even by losing the main pot. Actually, no. Like if we beat the guy with 90, but lose to one of the others, we're not going to bust. So you kind of have to work out your equity against the guy who covers you, and then your equity 4-way against all the people that you cover. So yeah, it gets kind of complicated.
Yeah, it's also fair to say that if Sylvester is the player who wins the hand and the main pot, but you have a better hand than Giraffe Cloner and the player to your immediate left, then you get to win those 2 bounties.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, there's a bunch of different calculations. You have to calculate your equity against Sylvester, because or with Sylvester taken out, because if you beat the other 3 but lose to Sylvester, you still get 2 bounties. Similarly, if Giraffe Cloner wins, you can win the bounties of. You can win 1 bounty, the bounty of Ogie. So yeah, it gets really complicated.
So guerrilla maths is what we have to do here. Barry, obviously you had about 20 seconds to make this decision. I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to be thinking you're doing too much guerrilla maths. I think you're going to be thinking of like, 370 bigs. I can brag to you about 370 bigs as well.
I'm not even joking. I was actually just screenshotting the thing, getting ready to go on Twitter, and sort of like if we actually watch back the full screen recording of me doing this, you literally will see me screenshotting the thing and going YOLO and stuff. So okay, so in a normal situation, I would need the one bit of maths I did kind of know is I in a chip EV situation, roughly sort of 20%, not quite in this spot, but so would it be fair to say we knock off say 2% of that, Dara, or would you
maybe a little bit more, 2.5-3% ish roughly, because of the additional side pot equity as well.
Okay, so I'm just gonna I did some calculations to try and justify the move. It didn't really go very well for me, but like this is the first one I went with, which was, would you agree roughly with these ranges as the starting from the initial?
I think they might be a little bit too tight.
Yeah, I think there's people with as much gamble as you here.
Well, yeah. I did a second.
Definitely Kings plus seems too tight. I don't think people are going to fold Ace King in this spot.
No.
I'm not sure they're going to fold Queens either, even though maybe they should. It's actually interesting just how badly Queens plus and Ace King does, though. when these are the actual ranges, like does worse than nines. But you see that a lot with the straights are interfered with. Yeah, it's really hard in these spots because these could be the ranges for sure. They could be looser, and you might have people just going with stuff like Jack 10 suited as well. So
well, I did that as well in the calculation.
So these are the YOLO ranges, are they?
Well, I assumed that the first couple of people would have relatively tight ranges, but then I assumed like one player in the pot would be calling with all their suited connectors, all their pocket
that
pairs.
seems like a reasonable assumption, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the range. What I'd assume. We start off with a relatively wide range, then two tight ranges, then a very wide range was my.
Yeah, we're actually in worse shape here.
We're actually in worse shape. That's the thing that I found interesting about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think twos is definitely speculative. I'm not sure. You'd have to be an absolute lunatic to call off with twos in this spot. But
well, I called with nines, so
yeah,
I'm with the guys.
yeah, but like nines is in bad shape against 5 hands. Twos is in bad shape is in terrible shape against 12 hands, and it's flipping against everything else. So, yeah, there's a bit of a difference. And if people are calling off with stuff like 8-7 suited, that's okay for nines, but doesn't really help twos much.
And then, so as you can see, like I'm still not getting the equity that I.
Now the big pair is really doing very well.
Yeah, and so then I thought, well,
just on the side, this is something I've been doing a lot of this multi-way equity recently because of flip and goes. And one of the things that stands out for me that was a shock to me was how well big pairs do multi-way. There's a kind of a feeling, somebody's going to dog you when you're up against a pile of strong hands, but actually, like big pairs just do really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, you and I shared a hand where I had ace 6 and the ace one of the aces and the sixes were spades, and I was contemplating folding one of the ace, so I had
ace 10. I think, yeah, you were thinking of keeping the ace 10 suited,
and then you did a quick calculation, and even under those circumstances, I think I had something like 28% equity.
Yeah, even with you had, and even if all the aces were gone, you were still in good shape. Whereas the ace 10 suited actually only had 5% equity. People overrate those types of hands on multi-way, and they underrate the big pairs for sure.
So speaking of a better hand to call with in this spot, I kind of looked. I just quickly swapped my hand and gave myself 4-5 of clubs instead, which is it's obviously not blocked by any of these hands. It can make straights and 2 pairs and flushes and stuff, and it performs pretty well, and we're getting more than the required equity based on the quick guerrilla maths there.
Yeah, very well done, this Barry. This is a really good point. Like, the thing about a hand like nines is the more people are in the pot, the worse it gets. Like, against one strong range, it does pretty well. Against 2 strong ranges, it's still doing decent. But by the time you get down to 5, you're in pretty bad shape. With a hand like 4-5 suited, it's actually a really versatile hand. It kind of doesn't matter how many players come into the pot. It's always going to retain equity well. And you can see in this spot, it's actually like, even on a chippy V, even we didn't have any chips in the pot and 20% was a break even, this would still be a slightly profitable call.
So I suppose people want to see what actually happened.
Go on, we'll have a look at what happened. But yeah, I think that's a great. Well, there we go. The 4-5 clubs would have been a nice hand in this spot. So I think that's probably the big interesting point about it, is that obviously the pocket nines, a decent hand heads up, maybe even 3 ways, shrivels up so badly in a hand like 4-5 suited, which we can then probably extrapolate a 6-7 suited is reasonably unencumbered too, because it's probably getting that bit of the board to itself against strong ranges, actually ends up doing quite well. So if you are in one of these multi-way situations and there is a bit of YOLOing going on at the table with people early on, just like punting for stacks, you're probably better off looking at a hand that's sort of, maybe, a middling suited connector, or even a low suited connector, than you are a hand that's very likely pipped by the better hands that'll do this.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Like with the low suited connectors, they always retain their equity. So they're kind of hands, even though it looks like really super spewy to gamble with them, they're actually generally always good gambles. Other hands have different properties. Like big pairs are always in decent shape no matter how many people are in there. Like even if everybody goes all in, aces is still going to be the favorite in most spots. By the time you get down to the medium pairs like nines, like they do well heads up, they do okay two-way, three-way starts to get a bit dicey. And then other hands have other properties like ace X, even ace X suited hates being multi-way because it's just dominated nearly always. That's point number one. But on the other hand, a hand like king queen suited or king jack suited tends to actually do better multi-way than heads up. So a few people may remember the famous hand where Justin Bonomo called a raise with king jack suited, and then
is what I recall,
and then there was shove and reshove behind him, and he tanked and eventually called. And people were saying like, how can he call? But actually, when you think about it, he kind of played the hand perfectly because against one raiser, king jack suited is not in amazing shape. So, but it's a good hand to call with. But once two people go all in, it's actually better off now than if it was just one shove. So in PKO poker strategy, we do have a couple of charts looking at the full grid, the equity of hands heads up against reasonably strong ranges and the equity three-way. And it's striking that certain parts of the grid do much better three-way. Specifically those types of hands, king queen suited, king jack suited. Then if there are other hands that do even better in four-way and five-way pots like this one, like the 4 or 5 suited, as Barry has just illustrated.
And just for fun, I looked at my actual equity, and yeah, I wasn't doing so great if we knew the actual hand.
Yeah, actually, that's quite interesting. Like Jacks is not in any better shape than you there because it's also covered by 4 bigger pairs. It's only very slightly better. Queens doesn't do much better either.
Well, the interesting thing about the actual hands as they were is like my hand had to hit a set and also had to avoid one of the other guys hitting a set.
Yeah, that's why Jacks is slightly better than nines, because sometimes you'll hit your set, but the Jacks will hit his set as well. And similarly, Kings is in better shape than you or the Jacks or the Queens, because if it hits his set, it only has to worry about aces. It's also going to be really hard for anybody to hit a straight with all those cards missing.
Yeah, and the other tiny factor in all of those hands is the fact that some people will have suits blocking other suits. So for example, obviously the aces has the hearts and the spades covered. You drop down to the kings. Now their king of hearts is no good, but they've got the diamonds covered. Then you go down to the queens, and the queens has the clubs covered. So they are all picking up a suit there each. Whereas once you get down to the jacks, obviously they don't have a suit, and the nines don't have a suit either. So that's going to account for a very small percentage of this calculation too.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of the funniest hand histories I ever told me. Our good friend Tom Kitt, who was on actually was he the first ever guest on the chip race?
He was indeed our first lead guest for sure.
First lead guest, yeah. He told me a hand once where he got in kings against aces, and he said to me, "Yeah, I was like got kings against aces, and I didn't even have any suits." And I was like, "How could you have a suit? There's 4 aces out there." Like, but he had actually checked. He did. It hadn't clocked with him like that. Like the diamonds or the spades can't be live because the 4 aces are out. But yeah, that's a good point on the flushes as well. I mean, the nines. It's gone on the screen now, but the nines is actually only slightly worse than the jacks, which is slightly surprising. But the main factor for that is that the nines is actually the hand of those combos that can hit the most straights.
Yeah, absolutely. They're unencumbered at the low end.
Yeah, it can hit the 9 high straight, the 10 high straight, and all of those cards apart from the 2 nines are free.
Great stuff. Well, we'll head on to the next one. Obviously, Barry got his televisual moment there, his screen grab. He got to post that one to Twitter with his 5 times anyone else's stack chip lead after just one hand. We move along now to what looks like a couple of hands. Barry, is it going to be both tables?
Top table. The rest of this is stuff that I filmed in real time. So you get to see me sort of... well, you probably still get to see me snap call and snap fold, but in my world, it's still a difficult decision. This hand in particular, I'm covered with the 3 remaining players that are in the hand. And my question is, I think because I can't win a bounty, I think I have been playing overly bluff catchy in spots like this. So I want you to watch this hand and see if you agree. And we can ignore the bottom table. I don't know what's happening there. So first question is like, is this a re-raise?
I'm just going to check the equilibrium charts for this, assuming it was like a normal tournament. If this were a normal tournament, then Ace Jack suited is a pure 3-bet. Yeah, so it is a 3-bet. Even if it weren't a pure 3-bet in a normal tournament, it would be more of a 3-bet in a PKO. Because you're looking to up variance, you're getting called wide, or you'll get called by hands that Ace Jack suited dominates. So yeah, this is definitely a good 3-bet spot.
I understand all that. What do you mean by I want to up variance? Because it's a PKO, or just why do I?
Yeah, like as David has made the point repeatedly, having the chip lead at the table is huge. So anytime you don't have the chip lead, it would be a huge advantage to you to get the chip lead. So therefore, it's the exact opposite of satellite strategy. In satellite strategy, you're always trying to keep pots small and lower variance. In PKOs, you're always trying to increase variance. So that tends to mean make the pot bigger from the start so that you can win a bigger pot. If you do win, and like busting isn't horrible here. Now, your situation isn't terrible here. You cover, how many players do you cover? You cover 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, you cover exactly half the table. So you're kind of in mid pack. So that's a mitigate. If you were the shortest stack, you should definitely be looking to up variance to try and get to a spot where you're covering more players. But if you double up from here, there's a huge upside to that too, because if you double up, you're now chip leader on the table. So you should be trying to make the pot bigger, particularly when you have a strong hand. So like if you know what the equilibrium is in a spot, and in this case, in this specific example, the equilibrium is 3-bet. So even in a normal tournament, you'd want to be 3-betting. But let's say the equilibrium wasn't a 3-bet. Let's say this hand was just below the 3-bet range, or it was a mix. It was a hand you could sometimes 3-bet, sometimes flat. Then in a PKO, you should pretty much always 3-bet it, just for variance increasing reasons.
I do think probably the central sort of thing that's going through my head in a PKO is how many people I cover. And I do think I was protecting my lead over the remaining players rather than trying to get a lead over all of the players. I think that's the mentality that I'm going in with and stuff.
Yeah, that's fair enough. There is a bit of balance there. But yeah, okay.
I like that counterpoint. I think that, as Dara says, there's always kind of different factors in a tournament such as this. It's kind of the beauty of PKOs. What makes them sort of unsolvable and more complicated and more difficult in lots of different ways is that, yes, Dara's absolutely right. You want to get the chip lead because now you've covering everybody, and if you get moved tables, you'll probably be covering almost everybody there. But then on the flip side, you are right now covering 5 people at this table, and like you said, Barry, you'd like to, even if this hand was to go badly and you missed the flop, fold and still have that coverage.
Yeah. So I think the mistake I made pre-flop is the one I'm going to make for the entirety of the hand at this point. I think I've probably learned the lesson, but I think I was trying to keep the big blind in the hand as well, which is why I flattered rather than.
I don't mind the flat on the flop. If it was heads up, I would probably go ahead and check raise.
Why are you flatting on the flop compared to me? Because I'm thinking I just want to keep this in and potentially make one of these guys make the pot bigger, and for it to be a mistake for them to do it.
Yeah, we have a super strong hand. I mean, we have a hand we're definitely happy to get in on the flop, but there's a lot of turns and rivers that'll devalue our hand. So anytime you have a hand that's kind of strong now but likely to get devalued, it's not just that we might get sucked out on, which is what a lot of people focus on, but it's also the fact that if the guy has a slightly worse hand than ours, like a worse jack or pocket nines or something, if a spade rolls off on the turn, he's probably going to put the brakes on. So as I said, heads up, I think I would definitely always check raise this, but 3-way, I don't mind it because the big blind might stay in the hand. He might even decide nobody's showing real strength here. The button's just C bet. The other guy's just flatted. So I have like 6-7 or something, and I'll just raise.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think the fact that we have backdoor hearts as well means we can stick around on almost every turn card anyway. So that's kind of interesting too. it's going to be very few cards in the deck that's really going to put us under pressure. Like obviously a king of diamonds we're not going to love, a queen of clubs we're not going to love.
We're definitely not going to love a spade though.
And we're not going to love a spade much either, but we probably are, once we decide we're taking the passive line pre and on the flop, we're probably just in stationary mode for most runouts.
Oh, well,
yeah, I think we make our mind up on the flop, and yeah, I agree with that. We go into station mode. These spots are interesting heads up as well. Like when you look at these spots in solvers, how it splits check raises versus check calls. Solvers like to check raise these types of boards. One high card board with flush draws on it. And it likes to do that with hands, which I would classify as a pair and a backdoor. And the reason for that is that if we check raise and get called, we might not be in great shape. We might need to make a very, very strong hand by the river, but by having the backdoor flush draw, we have that possibility. But this pot is three-way, so I think actually you played it fine after the flop.
Yeah, I gotta agree. I'm a big fan of how you played the hand. You obviously made that kind of decision to go passive pre. Once you make that decision, even if it's maybe slightly inferior to being more aggressive, I quite like the hand, to be honest. I think your opponent's going to bluff a fair amount of turns there because he probably feels like you have a lot of pocket pairs that are bigger than fives. That he can maybe get you off some of them too. Now whether you should fold them or not, I don't know in reality, but most players might target that, certainly for emptying the clip.
This is the very next hand. I've got a button this time, and I do cover this player. This is a funny hand because it kind of looks like I owned the guy, but I don't think I played this well at all. So first question, are you re-raising this button?
Yes.
Bear in mind that we cover the guy.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, if this is a normal tournament, this is a mix, and it's usually a flat. It's something like 80% flat, 20% raise. But because it's a PKO, for exactly the reasons I gave in the last hand, all of the hands that are okay to raise, even like 5% of the time, I just throw them into the raise range in a PKO.
Yeah, I'd not played many PKOs for months, to be honest, prior to this, and I think I was in a regular tournament mentality when I flattered the hand. Which I'm going to do now. I was pondering re-raising, as you can see.
Having seen the first hand, obviously what you're hoping here is that both blinds shove, the other guy reshoves, and then you snap with ace queen.
So we probably bring in the big blind, we do. And we get the top, so that's pretty good. We've also got backdoor.
Very good at flopping top pair with backdoor flush draw, yeah.
Yeah. Backdoor straight draw too. So we've got lots going on here. This is a pretty good situation. Definitely don't mind a raise here, but I think flatting is okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep the other guy in the pot at this point. Are we happy with that?
Yeah, I have a strong preference for flatting here. I think hand doesn't really benefit from protection very much. We can cooler stuff like ace jack if an ace rolls off on the turn. He also, like, it's not 100% certain that we even have the best hand here. He definitely has kings and aces in his range and sets as well. We have sort of like a good hand, but not an amazing hand. We also have a hand that can improve on later streets. So I think that, and the fact that we're in position as well.
Yeah, I think I'm also thinking that the big blind could have like a king 10 of diamonds that he could go with on a flop like this.
Yeah, I mean, if he has king 10 of diamonds, he has a great spot because he covers you both. So it's definitely good to try and keep those or get those hands in now. The best way to do that, like if he's sitting there with king 10 of diamonds, he might very well raise now. But if the action goes original opener C bets and then you raise, he might have second thoughts about that.
So it was the turn I was wondering if I'd made a mistake on here.
So he's obviously taking a moment to make his decision here. Eventually goes for it. I think at this point I just get my hand in. I feel like there's those draws that could come in. We may as well get him to call it off, looking for the bounty. We obviously have a player in the big blind who's interested the problem here is he could have Jack 7-3 suited, even these kinds of things. He actually suddenly has more 2-pair combos than the rest of us, but at the same time, that's sort of being afraid of ghosts, and I think I just go with it.
Yeah, well, this is what I did in the end, and this is the thing I was want to ask you about, really, because I did this because I really wanted the bounty, and I've got top pair, top kicker. But even as I was doing it, I was actually really thinking that the Norse Kiji player, I think he's got quite a tight range, or at least it looks like that. And I wondered how many sort of worse queens he's actually calling with here. Is that a concern in this hand, or am I sort of?
Well, let me frame it this way to Dara as a question. I don't see myself ever getting away on rivers here, if I'm honest. So
I think that's a crucial point. Like, we don't love this spot, and even on the flop, I said we don't necessarily have the best hand, but like we have a hand that can't fold to any action. Like if we call here and he shoves river, unless it's like the worst river imaginable, 10 of diamonds or something, 10 of clubs actually would be worse. I can't imagine ever consider folding. So we should just forget about that part of the game tree and say, well, look, we're getting in against those hands. If we're beat, we're beat, the old cliche. So now let's focus on the hands that we're ahead of. We're ahead of stuff like King, Queen, Queen 9, Queen Jack. King Jack, Ace Jack, all those types of hands. What's the best way to get those hands in? And I think the best way is to raise on the turn. He might put you on a draw that's trying to muscle him off. He might cry calling me because there's one card to come. Whereas if he has those types of hands, and there's a lot of rivers where he might just check fold. So I think the best way to play that. Also, the third player in there, now we are kind of in a spot where we do want to deny equity. He's going to have drawy type hands that we're fine to continue on the flop, but now with only one card to turn, we can one card to come, we can force out. So yeah, I think we have to shove here. And
good. I was just rather surprised to see him turn it with probably it felt like the one hand he would call me with there.
Yeah, no, his hand kind of makes perfect sense, and we can understand why he sort of thought for so long on the thing as well. He's like, oh well, I picked up equity now, but like I still only have queen high, and two people are top pair dubious kicker, two people have called off. But I think he probably made the same decision we did, which is I can't fold my hand now, so I might as well be aggressive with it.
So just to kind of point out the difference between the early game and the end game in PKOs, this is a very different spot, but the same hand. This is 6 people off the final table, and we've been 12-handed. We've been at 2 tables for a really, really long time in this tournament, and everyone at the table is playing really tight. And we're at the point now where it's, the big money payouts are looming and the bounties are less significant. So we get a limper. I mean, first of all, do you? Is this a shove? Am I in any world? Is this a shove, or is this re-raise? Should I have raised more? What do you do when someone limps under the gun 6-handed like this?
I quite like the isolation. I think that's perfect. I might go a tiny bit bigger, but 3x seems okay given that with stack depths that are around. I think it's pretty close to fine.
Yeah, I think it's a bit too much to shove. There's only, when it gets to once there's out there, there's 3.25 bigs. So, in these spots, generally, if you're adding 20% to your stack, if everybody folds, that's a good spot to shove. But in this case, you'd only be adding roughly less than 10%. So it's a bit too much to risk. You're also going to tighten up the ranges to hands that you're in bad shape against. So yeah, I like the isolation. My general rule of thumb is like, unless I have reason to think that this guy is a trapper. Now there's no HUDs on Unibet, so it's more difficult to assess. But like you see them sometimes. You see guys who are very aggro, but they have very few limps. Maybe they're V-pipping 25%, and their pre-flop raise, they're raising 23%. When you see those kind of stats, you know that missing 2% isn't junk. It's usually aces and kings. So against that kind of guy, I probably wouldn't raise. But against everybody else, I would. My general rule of thumb is, if this is a hand I would have opened had it been folded around to me, if somebody limps, I'll go ahead and raise it.
So my question here really is that, as I mentioned, the last 2 tables have been really tight and gone on for a really long time. this is pretty much the first time I'd seen this player re-raise. In my mind, if this was a regular tournament, this would be quite an easy fold for me, because we're, the bubble factor here is quite extreme. Like, I'm just a few places away from, and this is Unibet as well, so it's the lucrative pay jumps start at 9 places, even though it's not at the final table, if that makes sense. So in a normal tournament, I'd be folding this straight away, but I do cover the guys. So does that change anything for you, considering we're now in the ICM heavy portion of the tournament?
Well, there's 2 things I want to point out, first of all, because we may have some viewers of this video who are used to playing with their stack on the table and not this number of big blind situation that we see. So just to clarify for everyone, Barry is 8 of 12 here, and as he mentioned, approaching the final table of 6. The second thing I would say is, relatively, he has a small bounty, and to add to your point, bounties are less important now as we approach the final table. So they're the 2 mitigating factors. I guess with that in mind, I'll pass over to you, Dara.
Yeah, no, you made the case exactly. Bounty factor here is tiny. It'd be easier to calculate if we could see the stacks on screen, which is why I generally advocate showing actual stacks. And
yeah, I've stopped doing the big blind view.
But nevertheless, we can see that the average stack in the tournament is 44.65 big blinds. 300 people started and 12 remain. So that means that the starting stack is 1/25 of 45. So it's about 1.8. So this guy has 20 starting stacks and he only has 2 starting bounties. So bounty factor 0.1. It's completely negligible. It's going to subtract maybe 0.1 or 0.2% of the equity that you need. ICM is going to add a lot more than that. Ace Queen does really badly against strong ranges. Like, he's going to have Ace King a lot here. He's pretty much never showing up with a hand you dominate. So it's a kind of either you're flipping or you're dominated spot. So your equity is probably only 33% against the range, 33, 35, 36, somewhere in that region. And the bounty factor is taking almost nothing off that.
Yeah, I think Villain here is probably meant to have a range of like 9s plus, and maybe just maybe he's meant to mix in some ace jack suited, but like he's basically meant to have ace queen or better too. So yeah, I totally agree with Dara here.
Yeah, good. I agreed with the way I played this one. I just wanted to point out the difference between early PKO and late PKO. Very, very different with the same hand.
Yep. No, that's great, and well played as well. Like, it's good. Obviously, you're punting away there at the start, and that's maybe the fun portion where the bounty stuff is actually of its most valuable. But now, when we get to the business end, you are making the correct adjustment. Well, of course, you're the man who wrote the book, so you should know that as well.
Is this a call on the button, Dara?
Yeah, the suited kings do really well here. Again, this is something we've learned from the solvers, but people used to throw these in as occasional 3-bets sometimes, but actually suited kings do really well in these spots. It's not a hand I would want to 3-bet, because if we get 4-bet shoved on, we can't call. So we're kind of destroying the value of our hand, and playing well in position creates a lot of good post-flop situations for us. So yeah, I like the call here.
And next question, is this a flat or a re-raise for you?
That's a good question. Obviously, we've got a little bit of backdoor stuff going on with the 3 interacting with the 6 and deuce. I think it's probably fine to just flat. I probably err towards flatten as well, because I think we can take it away from him on the turn in a lot of worlds anyway when he checks.
Yeah, what stage of the tournament we're here? A third of the field have gone yet, so the bounty factor is kind of a bigger consideration for me. I actually lean towards raising here, and the reason for that, I think, is that if we hit our flush, it's very hard for us to get the rest of the chips in from worse hands. If we raise, we give ourselves 2 chances. Like, this is a spot where if we raise and he shoves, we still don't mind calling it off, because we have, king will be an out sometimes. We have spades. We can also get worse flush draws in. His range is going to be wide enough that he's going to have more worse flush draws than better flush draws. And similarly, like with the back doors, like if it comes 4 or 5, it's also going to be very hard to get the rest of the chips in if we haven't already by that point. So anytime we have draws that if they come in are going to be very obvious in PKOs, and we cover the guy, I tend to lean towards raising.
Fair enough.
Okay, well, I'm delighted to see me diverging from your views here and learning stuff. I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't have flatted the king 3 suited pre. I probably would have needed like a king 7 suited to start thinking about it. So I'm clearly a few pips wrong there. And then secondarily, I probably would have taken the more passive line on the flop, and they're obviously advocating there for really going for the bounty. Oh, well, that's very unlucky, obviously.
Yeah, at this point,
situations you could have gotten.
This point, I started shouting "cock fuck" at the screen.
I hope you were wearing a tank top at the time.
I was, yes, I was.
And weird blue glasses.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a cooler, to be honest. First of all, the fact that he has that hand, as I said, that he can have all the worst queen high, jack high, etc. Also, the fact that 4 of the spades are missing and they still all come out. So it's understandable when you lose a big one like that to think maybe you've done something wrong, but I don't think he did.
I mean, this seems like a perfectly fine flat. I cover this guy. It's nice hand on the button, right?
Yep, I'm okay with that. And
this is a spot where you could even raise because, about half the field are gone, and he has. Does he still have starting bounty? No, he has more than. But bounty factor is pretty significant here. So this is actually a hand where you could profitably 3-bet call off against him.
Right.
So I don't mind 3-betting either, but flatting is fine too.
So I'm covered here, but I have a decent draw. Would you call in this spot?
No, we can't fold. Like we have an 8, a draw to the nuts. We have a backdoor flush draw. We have 2 overs. That'll be good a lot of the time. It's a small bet, so yeah, I'm definitely hanging.
And then this seems like a pretty easy call as well. It's the river that I wanted to.
I mean, we're getting the price here. Yeah. Oh, the river's interesting.
So.
Can I put something forward just as an idea? I think I might have got a bit frisky on the turn. I feel like obviously, yes, if we clearly have the price to call, so it can never be a mistake to call. But maybe, just maybe, with him leading out small on flop, which tends to be a kind of a maybe pair straight draw combo type of hand that might be in there a lot. Obviously, him from the big blind here, actually, it's very good of him to recognize that this is a board he can lead. So fair play to your opponent for recognizing that. He can have a lot of maybe like bottom 2 pair stuff. He could even just be kind of betting range, thinking this is the kind of thing he can get away with. But that turn, even smaller bet, maybe for me would have given me reason to sort of think I could maybe bump it up. What do you think?
I'd like that more if we covered the guy.
Okay.
The fact that he covers us, I think he'll fold less to our raise. But yeah, I mean, it definitely has merit for sure. But then the call is just so amazingly profitable for us, and we don't have to put all our chips in, and we can't win the bounty. The fact we can't win the bounty, like in the last time I said, I generally raise draws because when we cover the guy, because we may not get the rest of the chips when we hit. But in this spot, we can't win the bounty anyway, so that leans me more towards calling. But yeah, I mean, I like the idea, and it definitely has some merit. I think if we do raise the turn and he calls, we're going to have to shove the river to make the play profitable. And given that we're covered, I'm not super keen on that.
Okay. Well, the reason I included this hand was because I actually go for a bluff raise now, which it's not something I do very often, and I definitely don't do it much in PKOs. But because he bet the same amount on free streets, I mean and this is the Supernova. This is the biggest tournament of this second biggest buy-in tournament of the series. But generally, when I see this, it means that he's got a pair of 7s or something similar, and I felt like I could take him off the hand.
I think he can have maybe as strong as 5-3. That kind of makes sense. 6-3. That might be the kind of a way you might play a hand like that. I think you can also have 2 pair, like the 5-6 or the 5-7 or the 4-6 or something like that would make a lot of sense too. Where he's got 2 pair, he doesn't want to just check to you, and he kind of feels like a block is his best route. Yeah. Of course, hopefully, for his sake, good players are somewhat balanced when they choose a really small block sizing like he has chosen, and he's actually also incorporating some 8s where he's trapping you into or inducing you into a bluff. We'll have to see now if that's worked.
Yeah, I very much like the bluff raise here. We need to have some bluffs, and this seems like a perfect hand to do it with. Apart from the fact that we have pretty much no showdown, we're also blocking 9-8 and 10-8, which are two hands which might play like this as well. So yeah, this seems like a perfect spot to go for it, actually. And I think your read is right. Like anytime you see somebody bet the same size on every street, it's almost always a weak one pair hand trying to get to showdown.
And this is the next hand, and rather than showing what I did, like what folds around to me. What do you do, Dara and David?
My instinct is to fold this one.
Yeah, my instinct is fold as well. Ace 10 like just does really badly against under the gun shoving ranges. You're going to be dominated so often. Okay, let me look. Okay, so half the field are gone. This guy has the average stack is 36 big blinds, if I'm reading that correctly. So he has just under average. So he has, let's say, 1.8 starting stacks and 1.5 starting bounties. So bounty factor is 0.75, 0.8, something in that region. It's going to knock a few percent off, but not enough for a hand that's super easily dominated, in my opinion.
Right.
It's also worth noting that like we're not closing the action here. If one of the other guys comes in behind, Ace 10 is going to be in terrible shape. And Ace 10 offsuit is exactly the type of hand that does really badly multi-way.
Right. That's interesting. And I knew Ace 10 was not an ideal hand against the players that covered me, but I kind of thought this was I mean, I picked it out because it troubled me, but I thought this was possibly in isolation.
Yeah, David has very good ranges and instincts in these spots. What's the worst ace you would go with there, David?
I'd be honest, I wouldn't have been loving Ace Jack off.
Yeah, that's exactly my feeling as well. I think I would probably actually fold Ace Jack as well.
Yeah.
I think I'd need Ace Queen, and even Ace Queen I wouldn't love it, but I mean I'd get it in because there's enough like Jacks, 10s, 9s, these types of hands.
Yeah, I definitely feel good about Ace Queen, and Ace Jack suited is probably the biggest thinker, but maybe I even let that one go too. It's like it's close. Ace Jack suited is definitely close.
Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway, run like Barry, except he doesn't win this flip somehow.
Looks like we've got a familiar face now to our immediate left. Hopefully that's part of the equation here.
It is part of the equation. This was a relatively interesting hand, I think. First of all, what do you do here, Dara, if you're playing against you with 10s?
I definitely like the flat. I don't think I ever 3-bet here. We don't cover the opener. So yeah, just flat.
Cool.
Yeah, the thing I think about when I make these kind of like flats with hands like 8s, 9s, 10s, maybe even jacks sometimes at this depth, is that you end up with a very disguised strong hand, but you also end up making set over set, you having the bigger set a lot more often, which is nice too, because obviously there could be in there with 6 or 7.
Very good point. Like 3-betting, I actually I remember 2010, 2011, whatever year it was, I hung around with the French at the World Series, and I was lucky enough to hear all these strategy discussions, and that was one point they used to repeatedly make, was when you 3-bet a hand like 10s or even jacks, you tighten the range to hands that you're in bad shape against, and you don't allow that that set over setting. These hands play much better in single race pots.
So in a strange way, the flop has kind of put us in a position where, for the most part, what we had pre-flop is probably still the best hand. Whoever had the best hand.
Yeah. It's essentially a completely blank flop. You're right. Whoever was ahead before is ahead, and given that we're towards the top of our range, we can feel very good about this spot.
So
yeah, I think it's a mandatory c-bet from the villain, regardless of what he has. Like if he's in there with the 5-6 suited, he has to c-bet this board. It's like a great c-better because it immediately makes you have to fold out your Broadway stuff. Like you can no longer really continue with that. So he gets very cheaply to find out how interested you are and maybe put some real heat on you over multiple streets, because you probably kept yourself as not being able to have aces, kings, queens. So now he can really target this kind of middly portion of your range. If he wants to go for a very big raise, he could put you in a very tricky spot by the river, actually, depending on the sizings he chooses.
So I flat sort of flop and turn. So does Dara. Are we good so far?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, Dara can be in there with all sorts of pairs as well. You know, it makes total sense for Dara to potentially flat some pairs. It's quite a good spot. He's good visibility as well there on the button. So given that the turn came at 3 and he sticks around flop, it's no surprise he's going to stick around turn as well, given the sizings. King is an interesting card. It's a bit of a, you know, board changer in many ways.
Yeah, well, I was thinking there's no way Dara's got the king, but this guy could have bet 2 streets with ace king, of course.
I don't see him betting the turn with the ace king, to be honest, after 2 people call. I think he's going to decide, unless he just does it. I don't remember the sizing on the turn. If you might do a really small,
it was 4.5 every single street.
Okay, you might do so you might do a really small turn bet then, just as a kind of a blocker, so that you get to see the river. So yeah, I guess it's possible he has the king. I mean, this size now, it does just look like he has a pair.
Dara, is it fair to say that you would stick around here across flop and turn with a hand like ace queen? I feel like you might, given that you were the last to act. And
no, I don't think. I think I'd fold ace queen because I'd be slightly worried about ace king. I might have like my ace sets might not be good. I would definitely. Ace king though is interesting. I probably would stick around with ace king for sure. So therefore, I think I can have the king here.
But you probably would have 3-bet squeezed the ace king, I'm guessing, pre.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very good point, actually. Yeah.
So maybe the only ace queen you can have is the ace queen of diamonds. You do stick around for a very cheap price.
I think I squeeze ace queen too, though.
Okay. Yeah, especially
yeah, like this is a spot where like hands like ace queen and king queen in my seat, if there's only one raise ahead of me and everybody's folded, they make fine flats. But once the second player comes in, we're kind of strongly incentivized to 3-bet now or squeeze. So I think I probably don't even have those hands. I mean, maybe Barry's going to play this on and I show up with ace queen. But
well, I at this point I was I wasn't worried about the king. I felt I was ahead of the under the gun player quite comfortably. But my actual thought process was the only player in this hand who could have a 7 is you. Because you've got 6, 7, 7, 8, and ace 7.
That's a good point too. Yeah. I mean, I don't think we can rule out a 7 from the opener either. I mean, he would open stuff like ace 7 suited, 8 7 suited, 6 7 suited.
In reality, I think he's just made it very easy for us because 4.5 big blinds into 29.
Pairs, exactly.
You have a slam dunk call because he can have 8s and 9s and still be just doing this as a kind of a blocker. Still maybe hoping that you have 6s or 5s or 4s. Also maybe feeling like Dara does. So he's kind of made it kind of simple doing what he's done. Now, obviously, it's quite a good sizing. He's targeted to get 2 calls there from the pair of you. So actually, he's played it pretty well and probably had a good sense of where he was in the hand with queens the whole way and just decided to milk you both. So credit to him for that. But what's interesting, I think, about the hand all the way through is if he doesn't have a made hand, I think he can actually really turn the screws on both of you over the streets. I'm not sure if you agree with that.
I actually strongly disagree with that because if you think about it, you're saying 2 different things. You're saying when I have value, we should bet small, and when I have a bluff, we should bet big. Now, that's very unbalanced and transparent.
I would make one caveat: is I'm not saying that when we're strong, we should bet small. When we're not, we should bet big. I'm saying with this category, we might end up with two approaches in this sizing. I think with queens, he's very likely to have a sense that, okay, well, you guys would have raised kings or aces pre, so you probably, once you call the flop, particularly 2 of you, have under pairs to him, and therefore he's in milking you mode. But on the other hand, there would be a spot where maybe when he maybe when he has 2 big cards and feels like he can still hit, he could start going big, like with maybe ace king. So when he has aces or kings, he can maybe do this as well, but he can do it with ace king too.
You mean on the river or on previous streets?
On previous streets, he could go bigger. Like he could take a hand like ace king or ace queen and start betting quite big.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. I quite like that. Yeah, I think on the river he could have actually gone for more, because I'm not sure we can even fold our hands because we're both towards the top of our range. So like if we consider folding 10s or 9s here, we have almost no calls, and in a spot where you have almost no calls, you just kind of have to side call at the top of your range. So I think on the river, he should have probably just bet bigger and put us in a tougher spot. As it was, we were both able to call, and yeah, he always gets the 4.5 bigs. But if he bets bigger, I think we're still going to call most of the time. And people sometimes get these kind of spots wrong. They think, well, bet the size that always gets called. But if 4.5 bigs always gets called by worse hands, then it makes 4.5 bigs. If, let's say, a 15 big blind bet gets called half the time, that might feel worse to you because half the time you're not winning any money, but actually the expectation of that is 7.5 bigs, because you're winning the extra 15 bigs half the time. So it's an interesting spot from him. I mean, I think he should be absolutely certain by the river that he has the best hand. I actually remember this hand in game, and I didn't feel very good about my call on the end, but then I thought the size is so small, and Barry could definitely have 8s or 6s even. So there's just about enough chance. I think if he bets bigger, probably Barry calls and I fold. It makes my spot a bit easier. But like in the size is so small when it gets to me, I just have to think, is there any scenario where I'm good here? Am I beating any value? And it's not completely out of the bounds possibility that one of them has 8s and one of them has 6s with this sizing.
Yeah, and I think also to give more credence to my point, which maybe was not well articulated initially, the fact that he still goes three-handed, I think, does maybe mean that he should still be going for these value bets, albeit maybe a bigger one than the one he chose in the end. Whereas I think if he gets heads up after the flop, I really like him going big then with his not when he doesn't have it and when he does.
Yeah, I agree. It's harder to get two people to fold. So therefore, like sizing up with something like ace queen on the turn it might be a little bit ambitious three-way. But heads up, I definitely see a lot of merit in that.
This hand, relatively straightforward. I just want you to tell me if you think I made a pre-flop mistake.
I don't hate a flat here, I'll be honest. We don't know what Alegna does yet. I don't hate a flat there for very similar reasons to what we talked about, is having that disguised big pair that makes top set a lot. But squeezing has some merit too. Obviously, we have to be very disciplined there. If we meet a very large 4-bet, we might have to just toss it.
You're talking about a man who called off a 5-way all-in with 9s. So I don't think that's even in the arsenal. Yeah, this is a spot where I have perennial debates with Jack Sinclair. Jack definitely does what Barry does here, but like David, I see strong merit to calling. Similar to what kind of we said the last time, when you call with a hand like Jack's pre-flop, you have a much stronger hand than people will give you credit for.
There's a very simple reation for that discrepancy, Dara. You and I have not run like Jack Sinclair in our careers.
Yeah. Actually, Jack is playing more like us these days, crushing satellites now.
So I thought my re-raise was fine. My question is, like, do you ever call in this spot?
No,
I don't. Oh,
it's a super strong cold 4. I feel like he can absolutely
small blind
king, and that's a nice spot. But it's just super strong.
We don't cover the guy as well. Like if we cover the guy, there's some merit to just pure set minding because it adds to our odds, but we can't even get the.
Yeah, I mean, I think a kind of a theme that's perhaps developing is that I know what I would have done in a normal vanilla tournament, and this would have been an easy fold for me. And if this was the regular Supernova, that's a normal non-PKO, but I get this kind of, right, I should be widening my range slightly because there's a PKO, even though I'm covered. So in that respect, I guess I'm asking, should I play jacks the way I would play queens in a normal tournament in this spot? Because
I think even queens is pretty dicey, but I think like good money could follow bad here. If you make this call, you're going to end up with a stacked pot ratio of a little over 1, and then you get the 6-3 deuce board and he piles it in, or bets even worse for you. Maybe he bets like 20%, 15% pot, and then you're like, oh, okay, I guess I call, and then you either get it taken away from you by quite a convincing line on the turn if he goes for it there, or you get milked, or there's just loads of horrible scenarios, I think.
Yeah. Like I said, I think I would have easily fold this pre-flop, but it turns out you're both fucking wrong, because look at that.
Odds against queens, presumably.
Well, yeah, look, you're allowed to suck out, and that you did. But yeah, no, I think as a lesson from that hand, and it comes back to what sort of I think my initial comment was, which is I would much prefer, I might mix, but I would like vastly prefer, probably 90% of the time or more, I'm just flattened there and sort of playing a kind of a set mine / board mine with the disguised hand. But if I do choose that little frequency that I do choose to squeeze, I'm super disciplined and I'm tossing it to any more action.
Right, this is the final hand, and this is I just thought this was interesting. I cover everybody. This is the same table where I made the quads. Everyone thinks I'm a real look box. So we've had a limp and a limp behind.
Probably over limp again.
Yeah, I would over limp as well.
Even though I cover everybody, want to win some bounties, want to make the pot a bit bigger so I can get the money in easily.
Well, the beauty of over limping,
if
somebody does choose to go 8x in position now, you can call. If you 3x it here and now somebody 15x's or 16x's, I don't like it so much as a spot.
Yeah. I think the problem is there's a lot of players behind who are looking at a pot with 7.58 out there. So if they have a bigger pair than eights, they're going to play it aggressively, and we're not going to get to see the flop. Like I said in an earlier hand, that my normal thing is if I had a hand I was going to raise, I go ahead and isolate. That's true, except with this class of hand. This type of hand sort of just does best as a pure set mine in PKOs, and therefore, and the fact that there's another caller as well, that just sets it off. Like David said rightly, that if somebody makes it 8x now, we can call, but also if we flat and somebody squeezes, we can pretty much always call as well. Whereas when we bet this size, and if now somebody bumps it up to 20. We're not really in a good spot.
You've also chose a kind of a weird number there, Barry, because obviously a more standard ISO here, if you want to call it a sort of an attempt at an ISO, is to make it like 5.5 to 7.5. And you've done this kind of in-betweeny, like almost a standard raise off as if no one had limped, which is almost like, it always looks like a holding bet of somebody who really wants to buy their way to a flop at a reasonable price with a pretty strong but not very strong hand.
Yeah, it's fairly transparent. This is a pot sweetener. You just kind of want to juice the pot up a little bit for when you hit your sets.
Yes, that's exactly what I was doing.
And get the stacks in.
Maybe pretty obvious, right?
Yeah.
Now, most likely it will just go call here. So you're probably going to get to go to a flop with like 20 bigs in the middle and in position with a potential set mine spot. Maybe even some boards that you can continue on to. Maybe like on the 5-6-7 you're going to love, or even the 4-6-7 or something like that.
Yeah, we never get that far, David. Don't worry about any of that.
Okay, and Andy has thoughts, does he? If Andy has thoughts, I hope for his sake he does make it a kind of a decent raise, knowing that he's going to be out of position to almost everyone. I think he should be going at least 15x here, if not more.
Great.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Oh, so the limp. Also, it's going to be a limp.
Are we going to see the limp re-raise?
Oh no! What's going on? You promised us more action, Barry.
Yeah.
Here it comes, I guess. So the over limp raise. Well, I used to do this one, I remember live a bit, Dara, and you used to laugh at the other side of the table, knowing that I always had aces.
Yeah,
and the poor lad to get it in with queens, not knowing what happened.
Yeah.
See, this is probably the first time I've come across this particular move in a very long time. And if this was an under the gun limp re-raise, I know exactly what I'm up against. But an over limp raise, I just had no idea, and I was convinced I was ahead.
What?
No, I just
yeah. I mean, I know players. If this player's name was the battler with some numbers after it, you could very well be ahead. But in the absence of that, I can't imagine that we're ahead. I mean, ace king sometimes maybe more flipping, but is somebody really going to do this with sevens?
No, I'm thinking he's doing it with worse. I think he's like got fuck all and he's just gone nuts. That's my logic. I'm
going to be honest, Barry, and it's obviously not me because I always play with my avatar, but it is not beneath me at all, particularly in Unibet fields, particularly in these kind of nice supernova type fields, that if I just kind of feel like, well, let's throw in the overlimp with aces here in this spot, And, just once in a while, sometimes you just have to fold it on the flop or fold it on the turn or get into a mucky little pot. But once you stay really disciplined post flop, but you do get these kind of weird scenarios where you get a raise and a re-raise and suddenly you get it in and no one believes you. But like I literally only have aces when I take that line.
Yeah, the first player I ever saw doing this kind of line with sort of aces, kings was Feraldo years ago. There were so many spots where he had just called a raise and then people go mental behind and he reshoves kings or aces. So yeah, I wouldn't be as optimistic as Barry here that we're ahead. But
yeah, well, don't worry. I ended up folding because I didn't know what to do. But I just, it's not. It was just a spot that I don't encounter very often, and this is probably because I play like €10 tournaments for the most part, and this is a €100 tournament, and then presumably we see more creative things from stakes higher than that upwards. But it's just something that didn't compute with me. When I see somebody limp and then the next person calls, in my mind, that tends to stop a re-raise from coming in from anyone else because, people realize they've got to raise over two people and now they're getting good odds to call with a...
Yeah, you're right, I think, with most people, but like good players will incorporate some strong stuff in there as well. I think this would actually be a very good way to play ace king in his seat.
Yeah, it's not too bad either. To make it very clear, like I've clearly explained that I do this move on a very rare occasion, and I do it with aces. So I am completely unbalanced and not playing in a good balanced strategy when I do it. But I just think it's a wicked exploit against some of the people you get in this type of tournament. Admittedly, it is £100 buy-in. It is the main £100 buy-in on Unibet on a Sunday. But it is full of satellite qualifiers and it is full of wild play early on. That is certainly a feature of this tournament. And you can get paid off by a guy with tens and jacks here for a whole stack sometimes once in a while. And that's so valuable when you get the whole stack that time compared to the times where you maybe had to, spunk off 2 or 3 big blinds or 4 or 5 big blinds post flop, which don't really make much of a difference to your stack right now when you're starting with 150 bigs. So I do it in a complete exploitative way. Like, it's not balanced, but I think it is a you can flick in.
I said I think it's a good way to play ace king. I also think it's a good way to play aces, because the thing is, like, if you do the normal play with aces there, and you raise to whatever your standard ISO raise is, if the original guy calls or there's one or two other people call, the stack to pot ratio is going to be like not great for aces. It's going to be kind of in a spot where you're going to have an overpair most of the time, but if all the stack gets in post flop, you're not going to feel great about your hand. So I think by limping and allowing this to happen, you can sort of make for a more favorable stack to pot ratio post flop. Plus, you can also dupe somebody into calling off with 8s or 9s pre-flop as well.
But fair play, you didn't take the bait, and I think that's probably on balance. Yes, once in a while it's just going to be a lunatic having a bit of a fun on a Sunday, but I think you've made a judicious decision there to let it go.
Yeah, and that was the last hand. It's an odd one to end on because ultimately I was probably never going to call, but it's a line I don't see in the lower stakes tournaments. So it's nice to know that this is something that I have to be prepared for the next time I satellite into something a bit more substantial.
Well, again, obviously, Dara and I being ambassadors for Unibet, it goes without saying that we want to champion the cause here to some degree. But what I will say, without any fear of being accused of telling lies or shilling, is that the Supernova on Unibet, particularly maybe when it's a PKO and we get an even bigger field on a Sunday, is probably pound for pound the softest £100 buy-in. There are obviously bigger field ones out there, and the bigger field ones can multiply your money by more if you want to get into them. But this one usually lasts only about 7 hours and is riddled with satellite qualifiers. Is plenty of loose monkey play going on. So you don't have to really be in there thinking you're in a £100 game. If you can afford the buy-in, but you don't think you're a £100 player, you're maybe more like a £20 player. This is a really nice shot to take.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. Yeah, it's a very soft tournament. I mean, Sundays in general are very soft, but I think, as David said, Supernova is particularly soft. It kind of, like, years ago we used to look at tournaments to see how many satellite qualifiers there were, and that was sort of the hallmark. I remember back in the full tilt days, like, there were 200s that were softer than 50s, say, because the 50s had no satellites, but the 200s did, and therefore you got very soft fields. before we leave this hand, like I think the main takeaway of this hand is we have kind of destroyed the value of our hand by allowing the guy to do this. We had a very good spot to overlimp, and instead we've ended up putting in more chips and not getting to see the flop.
So are you saying satellite qualifiers aren't very good at playing in the main event? I didn't realize that was a line you took. That's quite controversial.
It obviously depends on the satellite qualifiers. Like the really good satellite players tend to be really good at normal tournaments as well. But then, you know, these are people who, for a start, Unibet doesn't really allow you to accumulate tourney euros, I guess we should say, rather than tourney dollars. So the supernova satellites are different, let's say, from, you know, World Series of Poker satellites.
Yeah, they're not a satellite tree that people grind in quite the same way. Obviously, there is a tree where you can grind up your tickets, but you know, for the supernova in particular, there are a lot of these ones that buy you the £100 ticket, and there aren't other ways to spend it, frankly. So it is always going into the supernova prize pool eventually. It's also fair to say, as the old satellite trees have gotten tougher over the years, because a couple of cunts decided to make a really well written book with all the secrets inside. In fact, it's the same pair of bastards who made the PKO book that is making these games tougher as well. So you know, thanks a lot for that, lads.
Yeah, but on the other hand, one of the authors is donking around, as this video proves, in the field, so giving something back.
Indeed. Well, look, no, I sincerely really do appreciate. I know you took quite a bit of time out of your week there, Barry, to not only play these games, but go to the trouble to record them and then edit the interesting hands together.
If we want to go with the we're not shilling for Unibet thing, like I was not paid to play in these tournaments. I didn't get tickets or anything. It was genuinely the most fun week I've had of online poker in a really long time. The dynamic, because the leaderboard specifically was about bounties and not about finish positions in the tournaments. It made it tremendously fun because the early decisions really counted in the leaderboard, and it meant, going with that pocket nines hand was tremendous fun for that reason. And you didn't necessarily have to go deep in the tournaments to have an impact on the leaderboard. So it was probably the most fun single week of online poker I've had in quite a few years.
I'm delighted to hear that. And actually, your feedback there is not much different from most of the feedback I've heard. I think people really enjoy the 8-day festival. I think they feel like that's something they can really do. They're going to play Sundays anyway. They probably play 1 or 2 nights of the week anyway. So suddenly for 1 week only, adding in a couple of extra nights doesn't seem so much of a commitment. Maybe it doesn't take you away from your family too much. I think that's nice. And I think you're dead right. I don't know this to be absolutely true, but I suspect this is the first time any site has done a leaderboard that was bounty specific and not about tournament finishing positions. And I think you're right, that added something very different, because it just kind of almost was like a separate thing. Obviously we're all in there battling, and once we get close to the final table, we want to try and pick up a podium finish. But there was this other carrot all the way through, which meant that even if you didn't have a good start, you could always bash your way to a few bounties the next night and end up quite high up on that leaderboard. So that was always a bit of fun.
Finished in the top 10, right?
I finished 7th in it, which was great. I was very lucky in the early days. I did get a few runs going, but again, testament to this idea. I didn't have any really deep runs until maybe the 6th day of 8, but I was smashing bounties for fun in those 20th place finishes and 30th place finishes, which again is testament to the fun of what you're describing.
Yeah. How many bounties did you get in the end? I got 56 in the end.
I think I ended up with around 90.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think the winner had maybe 120.
Wow.
Was that bounties or points? Because you also got entry points.
Yeah, that was bounties.
Yeah.
So you did. That was a nice other feature, was that for every tournament you entered, you got an extra point towards the leaderboard. So there was a bit of participation value there if you played every single one of them. Look, obviously the guy who won it ended up getting an average of 4 bounties per tournament he played, which pretty much means he won one or came second in one where he picked up loads, and then probably had another final table and another deep run somewhere in there, and then those ones he might have got 20 bounties and 10 bounties or whatever to average out. But it's tremendous fun, and I've no doubt we're going to repeat again. I've spoken to our main man, Sebastian Rebhan, who was the person who came up with this tournament series idea. And he has said that we're definitely going to do it again in the summer. So hence the PKO Winter Series. We're going to have a summer series, and it's going to be a twice a year affair. So I really like that.
Cool.
Yeah, I agree with that. I thought the leaderboard based on bounty was a brilliant idea, and it really accentuated the whole bounty aspect, and I made it much more fun. I have actually seen leaderboards done the other way where it's finishing position, and for me that kind of like that's sort of pointless, because PKOs are different, and the way you accentuate that is by having the leaderboard based on number of bounties.
Yeah, absolutely. And sure, the guys who won the tournaments won enough anyway, and they're probably going to be in the mix for the bounties anyway too. So anyway, look, let's leave it there. Thank you again, Barry. Fantastic work getting this together, putting it all together. Dara, thank you so much for your analysis as usual. Some fantastic points, some strategy stuff there that I'm sure we can benefit from. And let's do this again, because I feel like this should be a recurring thing now. I know this is the second time we've made a video like this. I feel like we should at least maybe try and make one every few months.
We should do satellites next, because there's an opportunity to plug a book, and I'm actually quite good at those. So
yeah, it's really funny to see Barry play PKOs versus satellites. It's almost like watching a split personality. But Barry did a very good job here selecting the hands. They're all very interesting. There was a lot to talk about. I think the recurring theme is that Barry has it in his head that you just have to be wider in every spot in PKOs, which is kind of true. But there's a difference between widening your ranges slightly and calling it off 5-way with 9s.
Yeah. Well, I beat you in the leaderboard there, didn't I? So that's probably counted.
Okay, guys, on that note, we will leave it there. Thank you both very much.